Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Rev Bonnie, the community spiritual leader here at the center, and it is always wonderful to kick off a new month with a new topic. As we know, it's already the 1st of July. Hard to believe, but here we are. And this month's topic is the divine mandate, freedom. We're 4 days away from the 4th of July. Perfect song. Amazing song, wasn't it? Yes. So, 4 days away from the 4th of July that many of us celebrate, and there are people in our country, the indigenous people and others, who actually go into mourning on that day. No matter where you are on that spectrum, the concept, the idea that I think is coming through and moving through everyone's mind is the idea of freedom. What is freedom? What does it look like? How do we express it? What does it mean to us? Does freedom mean that I get to do whatever I want, whenever I want to, however I want to? Don just said no. Nancy's saying yes. Or are we free in the context of a community and the context of others, with that idea of do what you will but harm none? What does Ernest Holmes mean when he says the divine plan is one of freedom? I'm going to read to you from the very first page of the first chapter of his textbook, where he says, the divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God-ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law, and law is capitalized. Thus, the inherent nature, and see, I've got the dry throat thing going on too. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. We do well to listen to this inner voice, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, of a love beyond our fondest dreams, of a freedom which the soul craves. But the great love of the universe must be one with the great law of its own being, and we approach love through the law. This, then, is the teaching, love and law. As the love of God is perfect, so the law of God is also perfect. We must understand both. So, what does Ernest Holmes mean by law? When I first heard how Ernest Holmes talked about law, I thought about the fact that humans create laws, right? Aren't we the ones that put those together? And in fact, a lot of the human laws tend to evolve and change, and some are even on the books that are totally outdated, so I had some fun and decided I wanted to share a few of those with you. You can Google it and find a lot more. But if you're in Missouri, you're not allowed to drive down the highway with an uncaged bear in your car. And in Farmington, Connecticut, the cows have the same rights on the highways that you do. And this is really important. When you go to Orlando, Florida, when you park your elephant, you need to deposit the same amount of change as you would for your car. And in North Dakota, it's actually illegal to serve beer and pretzels together. Then there are a lot of what they call blue laws. Those are the laws that were created for Sundays only. And so on Sundays in Salem, West Virginia, it's against the law to eat candy less than an hour and a half before church. Did anyone have candy this morning? And in Winona Lake, Wisconsin, you're not allowed to eat ice cream at a counter on Sunday. And I don't know, Marcia, if you know this, but in Kansas, it's against the law to get cherry pie a la mode on a Sunday. And a lot of states have outlawed marbles, dominoes, and yo-yos on Sundays. There's also a lot of laws that were created pertaining to women. And if you look at those laws, again, often laws that humans create are created out of a sense of trying to create safety or protection of someone in some way. So one of the laws says that women in Cleveland, Ohio, and this is still on the books, are not allowed to wear patent leather shoes in public. The reason being that the shiny footwear could allow someone to look down and see something that they shouldn't be seeing. And women in Florida can be fined for falling asleep under the hairdryer in the hair salon. And one that I didn't know about, in Michigan, it's against the law for the woman to go do anything with her hair without her husband's permission. Her hair is the property of her husband. Very interesting, isn't it? So what the person who put this article together said is that if you look at old statutes, some that are still on the books, all of these are still on the books apparently, you will see what the past prejudices as well as what our past, best intentions were as these laws were put together. So is that the kind of law that Ernest Holmes is talking about? No. Those aren't the kinds of laws he's talking about. When he says the truth points to freedom under law, with the capital L, he's talking about laws like the law of mind and action, the law of spirit, and he's likening law to scientific laws, the way, like the law of gravity, the way that kind of a law works, the way it works for any person that puts it into action. And sometimes it's working for us and with us even before we're consciously putting it into action. What he says about that kind of law is the law is neither good nor bad. The law is and responds. So let's think back then to freedom and this idea that truth points to freedom under law with the capital L. The reading that Martha did for us this morning is, like she said, in this month's Science of Mind magazine in its entirety, and it comes from a lecture that Ernest Holmes gave on July 4th, 1937. And when I read it, I was amazed at how relevant it still is today in 2018. So I recommend either getting this magazine or you can go to somarchives.org, scienceofmindarchives.org, and look it up and read it in its entirety. It's very worth it. I'm going to be sharing bits and pieces of it with you today because I think it's that important to hear what he had to say. And so I'm going to begin by sharing a piece. This is near the end of his lecture. The evolution of freedom in the human mind is a slow process. Many movements in the world that claim to seek liberty only produce new kinds of bondage. We should be aware of them. They are born out of the idea of depression. They are born out of the spirit of bondage. If we want freedom, we must understand that freedom can never come by the imposition of a will of the minority over the majority. It is born finally and only in such degree as some system is devised whereby individuals are allowed complete freedom so long as they do not, in their freedom, impose bondage on someone else. I believe that the true spirit of democracy is a spiritual conception where there is freedom, liberty without license, and a flexibility that makes evolution possible on the foundation of freedom. So there's a lot to think about in there. What does he mean by liberty without license? That's something for us to start contemplating, I think, visualizing how we can have liberty without license, freedom without hurting others. Holmes often takes the word freedom and juxtaposes it with bondage. So he's saying freedom instead of bondage. And when he talks about bondage, he's talking about all kinds of bondage. He's talking about the mental bondage that we impose upon ourselves. And he's talking also about human bondage, if we try and put somebody else in bondage. So I thought it would be interesting to share with you that Ernest Holmes was born in 1887, and slavery ended 1883 to 85. 85 was the 13th Amendment. And so he was born not too long after slavery ended. He died in 1960, and the Civil Rights Movement started in the 50s and moved throughout the 60s. So this idea of human bondage and what we do to each other as humans was also on his mind, in addition to what we do to ourselves in terms of our own thinking. And so again, this is from his words. The kingdom of God cannot be divided against itself. I think that that is all there is in divine wisdom. The kingdom of God cannot and will not be divided so long as I seek to hurt, I will be hurt. We desire freedom. We do not like evil. We don't like pain. We don't like poverty. We don't like unhappiness. Why should we? None of us want to go to bed and worry at night. God does not impose it on us. So why do we do it? Because we sense freedom, we sense liberty, we sense God, yet out here in the objective world we experience limitation. And the argument, and I think he's talking about the argument that goes on in our own heads, the argument is between what we feel ought to take place and what we see and the world experiences. It seems as though we are two people, one that experiences evil and one that knows that there should be no evil. So as you're thinking about the inner bondage, what is it that we can do in our thinking that creates that bondage that we cause ourselves? There's those beliefs and limitations. I can't do whatever, X, Y, Z. I believe in lack. So often it's that belief in lack that creates a lot of the stuff around us, a lot of those laws that are created for us, that there just isn't enough. So we figure out ways to work with that on the human level, and we create more bondage as we think we're freeing up other things. The belief in our past mistakes and that they bind us. I'm not going to read all of it, but I do want to point out to you that Ernest Holmes has a very short chapter in here under the meditations section on page 561. So if any of you are feeling like you're still in bondage to a past mistake that you made, know that the heading of this chapter is, I am not bound by any mistake. He says, there is nothing we have done, said, or thought which rises up against us, which has power over us, or which limits us. And there's a whole lot more. So I encourage you to read that if you're feeling like you're bound by some past mistake. So those are some of those beliefs that we have in our own mind that we cause ourselves to limit ourselves. Often we try and protect ourselves, so we create walls or we bind ourselves by separating ourselves, and we end up isolated. So as much as we're walling out someone, we're walling ourselves in. And we're moving in a space where we're believing that we're safer while at the same time creating that separation between us and someone else. Again, our focus this month is, as Holmes puts it, the divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. I think this is the key to this concept of freedom that we have, and yet I think it's one of our greatest challenges as human beings. How do we move in a world where we allow freedom for every living soul? And what does that look like? Again, do I just get to express whoever I am, however I want to? And what would that look like? Does freedom mean that I get to create a world that reflects my views? Do I get to create those human laws that support my worldview and impose them on other people because they make me feel safe? I think in a lot of ways that's what the idea of freedom is meant to us. If we look at those silly laws that are still in place, and if we look at some of the laws that are in place today. Now, mind you, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with these laws, but we have seatbelt laws. We have laws about car seats and infants being in car seats up until a certain weight. We have non-smoking laws. We have laws about not drinking or texting while driving. That just blows me away. But we have laws about that now. So those laws are in place with the idea that we're creating safety and we're imposing that idea of safety on someone else. So that's what humans have done with their lawmaking and their idea of what creates freedom. And then there's still the big one. And again, I'm not saying which I am supporting here. I'm just saying this is a big one that's creating separation in our country. The ideas about the laws related to women's bodies. Do women get to choose what they do, or do the people who feel so strongly that it's safer and better for women not to ever have an abortion get to write the laws? Who writes these laws? And what happens when what feels like freedom to one group or one person feels like bondage to another? Now, what I have always said is that if we have an idea, that idea obviously can have support through spirit or through life. So there has to be a way that we can figure this out. There has to be a way that we can figure out how to create liberty without license, freedom so that every living soul feels like they're free. Again, these are Ernest Holmes' words from that same lecture. And when the world begins to develop its freedom, seldom does it do it directly. It generally creates a new bondage. When we kill the old devil, we are likely to give birth to a new and more subtle one. War is more to be feared than ever before. And remind you, he's writing this in 1937. Think about today. War is more to be feared than ever before because we have more knowledge without more wisdom. The final freedom will come only as it is tied to divine wisdom. So what does he mean then by divine wisdom? One of the things that I think is interesting is that after all these years, and we can go back way back in human history, we're still living with these issues and these questions. We're still figuring out how do we live free and not impose or harm others. So what is that divine wisdom? Where does it come from? I believe it comes from the idea of unity, where Ernest Holmes said, the kingdom of God cannot be divided against itself. That idea of unity. When you came through the social hall this morning, you probably noticed that it looked like the 4th of July celebration going on. There's United States flags out there, and that's somebody's right. They decorated on their own. That wasn't my decoration. Somebody else decorated. We have the freedom to do that. But my question is, when Ernest Holmes talked about freedom, was he only talking about those of us who are under that flag living here in this United States, or was he talking about all people? What was he talking about when he was saying freedom? So again, I'm going to read you his words and let you consider that. He said, we are bound into a supreme unity. We are tied into an immutable law of irrevocable cause and effect. That is unity moving into action. Now that's a concept that I still am contemplating. Unity moving into action. Cause and effect is something that happens as a result of the use of unity. Consequently, we are one even while we are many, and since each one of us is a part of the whole, if we seek to destroy the other, we only ultimately hurt ourselves. That is the great lesson of life. Freedom, then, will come only in such degree as we no longer do anything that hurts anyone. But that does not mean we have to become a spiritual or intellectual doormat. So there's a key also. I do not believe in that. Nothing in my belief causes me to feel that God or the creative principle wants me to suffer for myself or for anyone else. Take a deep breath. There's a lot of thought there. Lots to contemplate. How do we create liberty without license? How do we do nothing to hurt others without becoming a doormat ourselves? How do we honor the unity of all people and still express as that individual personality that we are expressing God as who we are? Many people I found were attributed with this saying, and so when I went online to find out who said this, a lot of different people were given credit for it. You've probably heard it. No one is free until all are free. That idea was said in a variety of different ways, but no one is free until we are all free. So how do we create that world that works for everyone so that all feel that they are free and have that experience? Especially when freedom can mean so many different things to so many different people. Last week, I went up to the domes with Catherine to help out Lillian and Doug, and Roger got to go up there too. We went up because they had a call out for some help to clean up the land and to do some work, and I gave her a day up there. But before we got started, I was talking to them about this concept that I was going to be talking on this Sunday. So I asked them, what do you think freedom means? What does freedom mean to you? Well, you all that know Lillian can imagine she broke out into, freedom's just another word for... I figured y'all would know the rest of that. Yeah. And then I wished I'd had my tape recorder because she just broke into a talk that was fantastic. And I'm like, taking notes. She said, there's your talk. Well, of course, I came up with my own. But one of the things that I did was go online to look at those words to see if I might have the band sing those words for us. And I realized that what she was singing about was just hitting rock bottom. Getting to that point where you have nothing left, and actually when you're there, how freeing it feels. Because there is nothing left to lose. But what Lily did with that phrase was she went, well, if you have nothing left to lose, that means you have no attachments. That's when you release all your attachments to stuff or to outcomes. And so I started thinking about that. We can make a choice to release our attachments without hitting rock bottom and still experience having nothing left to lose and the freedom that comes from that. So then, on Thursday, the healing group is now calling itself the Healing Consciousness Discussion Group, and we had a great discussion, and we were looking at how do we learn? How do we heal? Do we only learn through that old adage, no pain, no gain? That's what I heard a lot when I was backpacking in high school. No pain, no gain. Is that the way we learn? Is that the way we heal? Or are there other ways? Ernest Holmes just said in that reading he didn't believe that we have to suffer. And yet I know I've experienced what I call the cosmic 2x4 more times than I would like to have experienced it. And that's when I might have an inkling or an idea of doing something, but I don't listen at first. And I push it, or I wait, or I stay attached. And then all of a sudden it's like, whack, you're not going to be attached to this anymore. There it goes. And so as we focus on the idea of unity as the place where divine wisdom comes from, can we have unity and still release our attachments to how the other person looks, acts, what they eat, what they do, all of that stuff? What are we attached to, and can we release those attachments from a place of unity? This whole discussion of do we have to hit rock bottom or can we learn and heal in another way reminded me of a movie that I was actually kind of forced to watch because I was interpreting in a class when the professor showed the movie. Some of you might have seen it. It was made in 1983 called War Games. And the premise is, I'm not sure that y'all are going to want to go out and watch it, so I'll just tell you the basic story. The premise is there's a professor, Professor Falcon, who creates a computer program that is basically going to be able to set off every nuclear warhead around the world, so essentially humankind just annihilates itself. And a teenager hacks in, discovers this program, and is trying to reason with him and get him to stop the program. And of course, it was all the tension and buildup. But one of the things that Professor Falcon said really struck me. He said, if we annihilate ourselves, nature will start over just like it did after the dinosaurs. When I heard that, I thought, wow, what a thought. If we think of nature or God or that life force, sure enough, if humans choose in the freedom that we have to annihilate ourselves, nature and life will continue. God will continue, just maybe not expressing as us in this form. And so if we choose to do that, that to me would be the ultimate cosmic 2x4. Wake up, folks. You know, your spirit might go on, but it's going to be very, very different. So again, I ask, how do we learn? How do we choose to learn? Do we wait till we have nothing left to lose, including life itself? How do we heal? How do we want to experience freedom? Can we release our attachments and move out of that unity, the divine wisdom that comes from that unity? So when I asked that question at the Domes, Catherine's answer was, freedom is when you're free from fear. And again, if you think about it, it's the fear of lack, the fear of change, the fear of limitations that causes us to create a lot of these laws that are for our own good and our own safety. But it's also what creates, the fear creates all those mental blockages and walls. And we need to look at how we can free ourselves from that bondage. How do we free ourselves from the bondage of fear? What would that look like? How can we release those blockages and allow Spirit to just move through us and express through us? Again, breathe. I've given you a lot of things to think about, a lot of Ernest Holmes' own words, again from his 4th of July 1937 talk, which I think is still so amazingly relevant today. So I'm encouraging you, whether you celebrate the 4th or not, or however you choose to celebrate the 4th, this month we're looking at that divine mandate, freedom. Discuss among yourselves, what does freedom mean to you? How do you express your freedoms? Contemplate what liberty without license looks like. As we visualize it, as we see it, it starts to take form in the world. What would the divine wisdom look like as it's rooted in unity? How would that express through us as freedom? So I have one final thought. And this also comes from this month's Science of Mind magazine, and it's written by our community spiritual leader of all of the centers, Dr. Ken Gordon. And in here, he's talking about how he gets sucked in sometimes to what's going on in the world around him. He calls it being guilty of a dysfunctional, destructive compassion. Because he's judging and he has opinions about what things should look like out there. And he said, I forget that our freedom to be whole is always with us. He said, I buy into the belief that something is wrong or broken in the universe, in a universe that works in perfection. And I add to a societal concept that says wholeness is having to have everything the way I think it should be. Then he says, I should wake up and grow up. Then he says, but I remember, even asleep, ignorant, and immature, I am still free to be whole. And I love that. No matter where we are, no matter how we are moving through this, whether we're still learning with the 2x4 or whether we're choosing to release our attachments and not get to that place of having absolutely nothing, we are free to be whole at any point in time in this experience. And so again, I encourage you to talk to each other. Visualize what it looks like to have freedom in the form of liberty without license, letting go of your attachments. Sing that song, freedom's just another word for, but you fill in the blanks. What does it mean to you? I think we'll all be singing that for a while, because you are free to be whole at any time, right now, right here, expressing as one of this amazing unified whole. I totally believe that the divine wisdom is rooted in unity, and so it is.